Nora Kessler slid a chipped blue mug across the counter to the man who never once said thank you. He grunted, left the tip jar with her daughter's crayon label empty, and walked out. She smiled anyway and wiped his ring off the counter. Another regular said it loud enough for the 6 people in line. "You're running a charity, Nora. That man's bled you dry for a year. $3 a cup you can't spare." What none of them knew, not Nora, not the man who mocked her, was the small leather notebook in his coat, and the byline every restaurant in the city was terrified of. If you believe kindness never goes unnoticed, this story is for you. Subscribe before you keep watching, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. 5 in the morning, and Ashmill was still dark. The streetlights hummed. A garbage truck sighed 2 blocks over. Nora Kessler turned the key in the lock of Junebug Coffee, and the little brass bell above the door gave its one small note. She stepped inside. She always breathed it in first. The old smell. Roasted beans and floor wax. And something underneath that she could never name. Something that was just the building being itself. Her mother had smelled it every morning for 30 years. Now Nora did. She flipped the switch by the register. The lights came up slow, buzzing. One panel always a beat behind the rest. The caf was small. 8 tables. A counter worn smooth on the left side where 1,000 elbows had rested. A chalkboard menu she rewrote by hand every week. A window that faced the street and the shuttered shoe store across it. In the back room, on the sagging green couch, June was asleep. Nora went to her first. She always did. Her daughter was 6, curled under the wool blanket with the hole in one corner. One sock on. One sock lost somewhere in the sheets. Her breathing was even. That was the thing Nora listened for now. Even breathing. No whistle in it. The inhaler sat on the shelf above her, blue and small, and Nora checked it the way some people check a lock before bed. Still there. Still a little heavier than empty. Good, she kissed June's hair. She didn't wake her. School wasn't till 8. Let her sleep. Then Nora went to work. She scooped the beans. She ground the first batch, and the sound filled the room. That rough grinding roar. The loudest thing she'd make all day. She wiped down every table even though nobody had sat at them since she'd wiped them the night before. She filled the pastry case. 6 scones. A tray of muffins. Not many. She made only what she could sell. Because what she couldn't sell, she couldn't afford to throw away. She lit the burner. She filled the urn. And then, before she did anything else, she took the mug down from its hook. The chipped blue mug. It was the ugliest thing in the shop, and she loved it more than anything else in it. Robin's egg blue, the glaze crackled with age. A chip out of the rim the size of a thumbnail. Her mother had bought it at a yard sale before Nora was born. It had survived a broken shelf. It had survived a flood in the back room. It had survived her mother. It sat now beside the register, and every morning Nora set it out like she was setting out a photograph of someone she missed. She ran her thumb over the chip. She always did. Taped inside the till, folded and gone soft at the creases, was a note in her mother's handwriting. 4 words. Feed them first, count later. Nora had read it so many times the pencil had nearly worn away. She read it again anyway. Then she closed the drawer. That was the tradition. Her mother had called it the hard day cup. Anyone who came in looking like the day had already beaten them, anyone with that gray sunk look got a coffee, free. No questions. You could see it on a person, her mother used to say. The days that break somebody. You give them the cup. You don't make them ask. Nora had kept it up. Even now. Even with the numbers what they were. She knew the numbers. She didn't like to look at them, but she knew them. The lease was behind. The supplier wanted paying. The little accordion folder under the counter was fat, with things she owed, and thin on things owed to her. June's last doctor visit still sat unpaid on the fridge at home, held there with a magnet shaped like a strawberry. But the mug went out. Every morning. Because if she stopped doing the small good things, She wasn't sure what she'd have left. By 6, the light outside had gone from black to a wet gray. The first customers trickled in. Mrs. Okafor for her cortado, on her way to open the pharmacy. 2 construction guys for drip and a bag of scones. A woman Nora didn't know who wanted oat milk and stared at her phone the whole time. Nora smiled at all of them. She knew their orders before they said them, the regulars. And she said their names. And she asked about the things they'd told her yesterday. The pharmacy's new hours. The one guy's bad knee. It cost her nothing, and it was the only marketing she had. And then, at 6:40, the bell rang, and the man came in. He came in the same way he always did, like the door had personally offended him. He was tall and stiff-backed, in a gray wool coat too heavy for the season, and he moved through the room like a man inspecting it. 60-something, silver hair combed flat, a face that had settled long ago into a frown and stayed there. Nora had named him, privately, the Colonel. For the posture, for the way he held himself like he was still in charge of something, some regiment that had disbanded years ago and forgotten to tell him. He didn't say good morning. He never did. He went to the corner table. The same one. The small square one against the wall, facing the door, where he could see the whole room and no one could come up behind him. He set down his coat. He set down, on the table, a small notebook. Nora had noticed the notebook a long time ago. Leather, worn soft, a rubber band around it. He opened it sometimes. He wrote in it sometimes. But she'd never once seen him tear a page out. Other people's notebooks got messy, got dog-eared, got pages ripped and balled up. His stayed whole, neat, like whatever he put in it, he meant to keep. She figured he was a retired teacher. That was the story she'd built for him. A teacher who'd miss being right about things, and who came here to be right in private, in ink, about whatever old men are right about. She poured his coffee. Black drip, no room. She carried it to his table. "Morning," she said. He grunted. He didn't look up. She set the cup down. She smiled anyway, the way you smile at weather. And on her way back, she wiped the ring his cup had left on the counter yesterday, a faint brown circle he'd never notice and never mention, and she thought nothing of it, because that was just the shape of the day. He never tipped. There was a jar by the register for that, an old jam jar, and June had made the label. She'd written tips in green crayon and drawn a lopsided sun beside it. And the sun had a face, and the face was smiling. The Colonel had looked at that jar 300 times and put nothing in it. Nora had stopped expecting it. Mostly, she went back behind the counter and got on with the morning. It had started, the free coffee, on a rainy day the winter before. She remembered it because it was the kind of rain that gets into everything. The gutters had backed up. The street was a river. He'd come in soaked at the shoulders, and he'd gone to his table, and when she brought him his coffee, he'd reached into his coat for his wallet and come up with a fistful of change. She'd watched him count it. She hadn't meant to. But she saw his hands, and she saw them go still, and she saw him count the coins twice, slow. The way you count when you already know the answer and are hoping you're wrong. He was 60 cents short, just 60 cents. And something in his face went tight and closed, and he set the coins down and started to stand, to leave, to go without the coffee he came in every single day to drink. "Don't worry about it," Nora had said. He'd looked at her. "It's on the house," she'd said. Rainy day, and she'd slid the mug the last inch toward him and gone back to the counter before he could argue, before he could feel it, because she knew that look. She'd worn that look. The look of a person who cannot stand to be seen needing. He hadn't thanked her. He'd sat back down. He'd drunk the coffee. But she'd seen something, in that half a second before his face closed again. Not gratitude. Something older and flatter than gratitude. A kind of grief that had gone gray from being carried too long. The look of a man who had stopped tasting anything. Who ate and drank because the body demands it. Not because anything reached him anymore. She knew that look too. She'd worn it the year her mother died. So, she never charged him again. It wasn't a decision exactly. It was just that the next morning it seemed cruel to start, and the morning after that, and then it was a thing that was true, the way the crack in the mug was true. She gave him his coffee. He didn't pay. And in the ledger she kept, the real one, the honest one, she wrote it down under spillage. $3, spillage, every day. Because she couldn't bear to write it down as what it was, which was $3 she was giving to a man who never once said thank you. $3 a day she did not have, and if she saw it in her own handwriting under its true name, she was afraid she might stop. Spillage. It was easier. The books lied a little, so her heart didn't have to. $3 a day. 6 days a week. She had done the arithmetic once, at 2 in the morning, and then made herself stop. He had never noticed. That was the thing. He took the coffee like it fell from the sky. He had no idea it came out of her pocket, out of June's doctor bill, out of the thin margin between staying open and not. He drank it and grunted and wrote in his notebook and left. And he had no idea he was being cared for at all. Somehow that made it easier. A gift he didn't know to thank her for was a gift with no strings on it. It was as close as she came to praying. There were signs, if she'd been looking. She wasn't looking. But they were there. He tasted before he sugared. She noticed it without noticing it. Most people dumped the sugar in first, out of habit, before the coffee had told them anything. He didn't. He'd lift the cup, take one small mouthful, hold it a second, and only then decide. Some days he sugared. Some days he didn't. Like the coffee got a vote. Once he asked her who her roaster was. Just that. Who roasts this? Not a compliment. A question. Flat. Like an inspector. She told him, a little place out in Montevilla, a 2-man operation. She'd found them when the old supplier got too expensive. He'd nodded once and written something in the notebook, and she'd felt oddly like she'd passed a test she didn't know she was taking. And once, only once, he'd photographed a scone. She'd come around the counter with the coffee pot, and there he was, phone tilted over the plate, taking a picture of a cranberry scone in the gray window light, careful, like it mattered. He'd put the phone away the second he saw her. She'd thought it was strange. She'd thought, maybe he's one of those people who photographs their food, though he didn't seem the type. And then a customer had wanted a refill, and she'd forgotten it by noon. And the chalkboard. She'd written on it once, in her nice looping hand, Ethiopian Sidamo, smooth and bright. He'd read it on his way out and stopped and said, without being asked, that's a Yirgacheffe, not a Sidamo, and walked out before she could answer. She'd stood there with the chalk. She'd checked the bag in the back. He was right. It was a Yirgacheffe. The roaster had switched, and she hadn't updated the board. A retired teacher, she'd thought again, smiling to herself, wiping the board clean, missing being right about things. She fixed the board. She didn't think about it again. It was a loud regular who put the ugliness into words. His name was Chip, or the others called him Chip, a big florid man who came in 3 times a week and talked to the whole room whether the whole room wanted it or not. He liked Nora. That was the awful part. He thought he was on her side. It was a full morning, 6 people in line, which for Junebug was a rush. And the colonel was at his table with his free black coffee, and Chip was waiting on his latte, and Chip looked over at the corner and then looked at Nora and said it loud enough for everyone. You're running a charity, Nora. She kept steaming the milk. Morning to you too, Chip. I'm serious. He wasn't lowering his voice. If anything, he was raising it, playing to the line, the way some men do. That man's been coming in here, what, a year? Sits there every day. I've never once seen him pay. You're bleeding, everybody knows you're bleeding, and you're giving away $3 coffees to a guy who won't even give you a nod. A year, Nora, that's real money you can't spare. The room got quiet. The specific quiet of people who've heard something they wish they hadn't. Nora felt her face go hot. She kept her hands moving. She poured the milk. She made the little leaf in the foam that she made for everyone, even for men who embarrassed her in front of her whole shop. "He's a regular," she said lightly. "Regulars are the whole business." "Regulars pay," Chip said, and laughed, pleased with himself. And in the corner, the colonel closed his notebook. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at Chip, or at Nora, or at anyone. He just wrapped the rubber band around the little leather book, slow, and stood, and put on his heavy coat, and walked out. The bell rang. The door swung shut. He left the coffee half full. Nora watched him go, and her stomach dropped, because she was sure, she was certain, that she'd embarrassed him. That Chip's big mouth had finally driven off the one person she'd been quietly, secretly proud to take care of. She'd shielded him for a year, and in one morning it was ruined. And she blamed Chip, and she blamed the line. And mostly, uselessly, she blamed herself. "Well," said Chip, satisfied, taking his latte. Somebody had to say it. She didn't answer him. She wiped the counter where the colonel's cup had been, and there was no ring this time, because he'd left before it could form, and somehow that was worse. He came back the next day. 6:40. Same as ever. Corner table. Black drip. Like nothing had happened. She could have cried with relief, and she didn't let herself. Because there were customers. And because she didn't fully understand why it mattered so much. But things were already turning. She just couldn't see the shape of it yet. It came on a Thursday. It came all at once, the way the worst things do. The morning started ordinary. Gray light, first pot, June eating a piece of toast at the end of the counter in her school clothes, swinging her legs. Drawing on a napkin with the crayon she kept in a coffee tin by the register. The colonel in his corner. The line building. And then a young woman near the front of the line looked up from her phone and said, "To no one, to everyone, oh my God, is this Junebug? This place?" "That's us," Nora said, smiling, reaching for a cup. The woman's face did a complicated thing. Somebody made a list. This blogger, Dana Fisk. She turned the phone around like Nora could read it from 6 feet away. "It's going kind of viral. It's called," hang on, she read it off the screen. "Dead by Fall, Ashmill storefronts that won't survive." A pause. "You're on it." The word went around the room like a draft. "It's got," the woman scrolled, wincing, unable to stop herself. "It lists the block. And it says Junebug Coffee, and it says, a sweet little tribute to a dead woman's dead idea, running on fumes and pity. Give it till the leaves turn." Somebody in line laughed, a short, surprised laugh, the kind people make before they can catch it. Then they looked ashamed. But it was out. It had happened. Somebody had laughed. Nora stood very still behind her counter. The steam wand hissed. She had the strange sensation of watching herself from across the room. A small woman in an apron, in a small caf, that a stranger on the internet had decided was already a corpse. Running on fumes and pity. Give it till the leaves turn. June had stopped swinging her legs. She was looking at her mother. "That's not very nice," June said to the room, in the clear, carrying voice of a 6-year-old. "This is the best caf." A couple of people smiled at that. Softened, the young woman with the phone put it away, mortified now, and mumbled that she was so sorry she didn't mean anything by it, and ordered a large latte she probably didn't want out of guilt. Nora made it. She made it well. Her hands didn't shake. She was proud of that later, that her hands didn't shake. And that was when the second thing happened. Through the front window, she saw him crossing the street. A man in a good suit, 40-something, carrying a leather folder and a roll of tape. He was looking at the numbers over the doors as he came, checking them against something. And then he stopped in front of Junebug. And Nora knew, before he touched the glass. Preston Cole. She'd met him twice. Meridian Property Group. The company that had bought the whole block last spring, the new owners of the building her mother had rented for 30 years from a landlord who'd known her name. He didn't come in. That was the thing she'd remember. He didn't even come in. He peeled a sheet of paper off the top of his folder, and he taped it to the outside of her front door, at eye level, facing the street, so that everyone walking past and everyone standing in her line could read it. Then he looked through the glass, straight at her, and gave a small nod. The kind you give a thing you've already crossed off a list, and he walked away. The whole line turned to read it. Nora came out from behind the counter. She had to. She walked to her own door and stood on the inside of the glass and read her notice backwards, the letters reversed, which somehow made it worse, having to decode it. Pay or vacate. It said her name. It said the amount. $8,400 in back rent. It said 30 days. It had a seal on it, and a signature, and a date. $8,400. 30 days. She'd known she was behind. She hadn't known it had a number. This exact. This large. This printed. Seeing it in that official font was like being told the size of a tumor. Some part of her had been living in the softness of not knowing, and now the softness was gone, taped to her own front door for the whole block to see. The calf was silent. Even Chip, who was there, in the corner of her eye, had nothing to say for once. And the Colonel watched. She saw him. Over the heads of the people reading her ruin off the glass, she saw him at his corner table. Both hands around his free coffee, watching her the way he watched everything, steady, unreadable. He didn't get up. He didn't speak. He looked at her, and then he looked at the notice on the door, and then he did one small thing. He folded his coat over the notebook on the table, covered it, as if to put it away, as if this was not a moment to be writing anything down. Then he went back to his coffee. She got through the morning. She didn't know how. You do, is the answer. There are cups to make, and a child to walk to school, and a floor that still needs sweeping, whether or not the world has posted your obituary. She made the cups. She walked June the 4 blocks, holding her hand, answering her questions about the sad list and the mean man, with the tape in the calmest voice she owned. She came back. She swept the floor. But the math had come into the room with that notice, and it wouldn't leave. $8,400. She had maybe $1,100 in the account. The supplier was due, and that night, at home, June coughed just once. Just the small dry cough that Nora had learned to fear, the one that came before the bad nights, and Nora took down the blue inhaler from the kitchen shelf and shook it, and it was light. Nearly empty. A refill was $60. She knew, because it was always $60. $60 she did not have, that she would find anyway, because you find it when it's your child's breathing, you find it or you don't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table after June was down. She got out the accordion folder. She made herself look. And for the first time in a year, she thought about the Colonel's coffee. $3 a day. 6 days a week. Call it $75, $80 a month given away. Logged as spillage. Gone. It was nothing against $8,400. It wouldn't save her. It wouldn't even slow the bleeding. But it was the one cost in the whole folder that she could simply stop. Tomorrow, by doing nothing. By just letting a rude old man pay for his own coffee like everyone else in the world. She thought about it. She sat with it. She let herself imagine walking up to him and saying, "That'll be $3, and watching his face. And she couldn't. She sat there in her kitchen with her daughter's light inhaler on the counter and the eviction number burning behind her eyes. And she could not make herself do the one small, selfish, sensible thing. She got up. She dug the old till note out of her bag, the soft folded one she'd carried home to look at. Feed them first, count later. Her mother's pencil. Her mother's rule, made in a time when the calf was healthy and generosity was easy. But that was the whole point of the rule, wasn't it? Anyone can feed people when they're full. The rule was for now. The rule was for exactly this. Her mother had known there'd be a morning like this one, and she'd left a note for it. Nora put the note back. She did not charge him. She decided that on the Thursday of the eviction notice, with $60 she didn't have going to an inhaler, and $8,000 she'd never have going to a wall, and she knew it made no sense, and she did it anyway. The days after went thin and strange. She started keeping boxes flattened in the back, not because she'd decided to pack, but because some animal part of her had started getting ready to. She smiled at customers. She said their names. At night, she and June built a fort out of the flattened boxes, and June thought it was a game. And in the middle of it, the girl and the old man began, without a word, to become friends. June had never been afraid of him. That was a child thing, Nora supposed. The whole block had opinions about the grumpy man in the corner, and June just thought he was interesting. She'd taken to drawing at the end of the counter on slow afternoons, and one Friday, without asking, she carried a piece of paper across the room and set it on his table. Nora saw it happen, and her heart stopped. She started forward. But June had already put it down and stepped back, proud, waiting. It was a crayon drawing. A man at a square table, gray hair, drawn as gray scribble, a brown cup, and a mouth going straight across, not up, not down. Beside him, in wobbly 6-year-old letters, June had written, "The Sad Coffee Man." Nora braced for it, for the grunt, the frown, the drawing pushed aside, for the man to be cruel to her daughter, and for something in her to finally break. He picked it up. He held it in both hands, at arm's length, the way you hold something to read it properly. He looked at it for a long moment. And then he did not crumple it, and he did not set it down, and he did not hand it back. He folded it, once, carefully, along a clean line, and he put it in the inside pocket of his heavy coat, the pocket over his chest. "Thank you," he said to June. Gruff, quiet. But he said it. He'd never once said it to Nora. June beamed and went back to her crayons like she'd known all along, and the Colonel picked up his coffee, and Nora stood behind the counter with a rag in her hand, undone by the smallest thing she'd seen in months. She was still holding the rag when she noticed the tote bag. It was under his chair. It was usually under his chair, a plain canvas thing, and she'd never given it a look. But it had slumped open, and there was print on the side of it, and from where she stood she could read part of it. Rose City. And beneath that, a word starting with L, ledger maybe, and when he shifted to reach his coffee, his coat fell open, and something on a cord swung out from inside it, and caught the light before he tucked it back. A card. On a lanyard. The kind you wear to get into a building where they don't let just anyone in. She looked at it, and it meant nothing to her. A tote bag. A lanyard. A retired teacher with a subscription to the local paper probably, that was all. And she went back to wiping the counter and thinking about the boxes in the back. 2 mornings later, a man from the bookshop down the row came in for a coffee, and he was talking low to another shop owner about a rumor, and Nora caught the edge of it, saying the gray pallet's been in Ashmill. Reviewing. On the block. The other owner went pale. Actually pale, the color leaving her face. Here? You're sure? That's what I heard. Nobody knows what he looks like. That's the whole thing. He could be anybody. He could be sitting right. And the man laughed, nervous, and did not finish, and did not look at the corner, and neither of them looked at the corner. At the gray man with the notebook and the black coffee and the child's drawing folded over his heart. Nora didn't know the name. The gray palette meant nothing to her. She made the 2 coffees and thought only that everyone was frightened of something these days, and she had bigger things to be frightened of than a name. She had 9 days. The morning after the notice went up, she came in at 5 and started packing the back room. Just the back room. Just the things that were clearly hers and clearly not the calf's, the couch cushions, June's tin of crayons, a box of her mother's records she'd never had the heart to sort. She wrapped things in newspaper. She told herself she was only being sensible. She told herself it wasn't giving up. And when she'd wrapped what she could bear to wrap, she came out front, and she opened for the day the way she opened every day, because there was nothing else she knew how to do. She took down the chipped blue mug and set it by the register. At 6:40 the bell rang. The colonel came in, stiff-backed, and Nora looked at him properly for the first time in a while. And she saw that he'd gotten worse, too. Grayer, thinner in the face. The coat hung off him now. Whatever was eating her was eating him some other way, and she didn't know what. And she found that she cared. He went to his corner. He set down his coat and his notebook, and he waited for his coffee like the world still owed him one small, reliable thing. Nora looked at the pastry case. There was almost nothing in it. She'd baked less and less. But in the back was the little parcel she'd made up before dawn, hash and 2 eggs, wrapped in foil, the food she'd set aside for June's lunch, because it was cheap and it was hot, and June liked it. It was the one real meal in the building. It was not hers to give away. It was, in the strict and brutal arithmetic of a woman with 9 days left, exactly the food she could least afford to hand to a man who had never paid her a dime. She got it out. She warmed it on the burner. She plated it. She carried it across the room with his black coffee in the chipped blue mug, and she set both down in front of him, the hot eggs and the hash steaming in the gray light. And she said nothing about the boxes in the back, or the notice on the glass, or the number that was ending her. He looked at the plate. He looked up at her. Something moved in his gray face, some old grief cracking open, just at the corner. "Why?" he said. Low, not a demand. Almost afraid of the answer. Nora didn't have a strategy. She didn't have a reason she could have written in any ledger, honest or otherwise. She only knew he looked like a man who had stopped being fed by anything, and that she still had, for one more morning, the means to feed someone. "You looked like you needed it," she said. And she went back behind her counter. Behind her, she heard nothing for a long moment. No fork, no grunt, just quiet. When she glanced back, he wasn't eating. He was staring at the blue mug, both hands flat on the table on either side of the plate, staring at that ugly chipped mug like it had spoken to him. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat, and he took out the little leather notebook, and he slid off the rubber band, and he began to write. He wrote for a long time. The pen moved slow. She didn't watch him do it, because watching felt like asking, and she had never once asked him for anything. She wiped the counter. She rinsed the case. When she looked up again, the plate was clean. Every scrap of it. The hash gone, the eggs gone, the foil folded into a neat little square beside the mug. He was gone too. The bell over the door was still swinging. On the table, under the rim of the chipped blue mug, he'd left something. Not money. He never left money. A page. Torn from the notebook, the first page she had ever seen him tear, in a whole year of mornings. She crossed the room and picked it up. His handwriting was small and hard, like print. It only said one word: "Thank you." She stood there holding it. Then she folded it once, and she put it in her apron pocket, next to nothing, and she went to open the register because it was almost 7, and Mrs. Okafor would want her cup before the pharmacy. That was the last good morning for a while. The bank was on Tuesday. She'd put on her mother's gray coat for it, the one that made her look older, steadier. Like a woman a man behind a desk could lend money to. She left June with Mrs. Okafor. She sat in a plastic chair. The loan officer was young. He was kind about it, which was worse. He turned his screen a little, like the numbers were doing the refusing and not him. "There's no collateral," he said. "The lease is the asset. And the lease is in default." "I have 30 years of the same customers," Nora said. "That's an asset." "I understand." He didn't. "Ledgers, not loyalty. That's what I can lend against." She thanked him. She actually thanked him. Her mother had raised her to say it, and it came out of her before she could stop it. She walked back to the cafe in the gray coat, and she did not cry. Because June would be there at 3, and June could read her face better than any blogger in the city. The fundraiser was her one idea after that. She hated it. It felt like begging with a bake sale over it. She set a table on the sidewalk, a jar, a hand-lettered sign, "Help us keep June's lights on, 1 cup at a time." She priced nothing. She just poured. She thought the block would come. The block had already read that she was dead. That was the thing about Dana Fisk's list. It didn't just predict the ending. It made people act like the ending had already happened. Folks she'd served for years crossed to the other side of the street now. Not cruel, just embarrassed. You don't want to stand in a dead woman's kitchen and pretend it's alive. A few dropped $1 in the jar and wouldn't meet her eye. By noon there was maybe $40 in it, and a lot of pity, and pity doesn't refill an inhaler. Preston Cole came at the worst of it. He came the way men like him always come, right when you're lowest, because that's when the paperwork works best. He looked at her table. He looked at the jar. He almost smiled. "Miss Kessler," he had a folder under his arm. He always had a folder. "I wanted to offer you something. Between us." "I'm a little busy, Mr. Cole." A graceful exit. He said it like a gift. "Meridian's prepared to waive the last month if you vacate clean by the deadline. No collections. No mark on your record. You walk away. And this," he tipped his head at the jar, at the sign, "at the 6 years of her life inside the glass, this stops being sad." She looked at him a long moment. She wanted to throw the coffee at his coat. She poured him a cup instead, because that was the only weapon she had that felt like her mother's. And she set it on his side of the table. "On the house," she said. "You look like you're having a hard day." He didn't take it. He left it steaming. He left too, and the cup sat there going cold. The 1 cup that morning nobody drank. Then the Colonel stopped coming. She didn't notice the first day. She was too far under. But the corner table sat empty at 6:40, and empty at 7, and empty when Chip came in loud, and empty when he left. The second morning she noticed. The third she caught herself watching the door. The fourth she understood he wasn't coming back, and she was surprised how much that took from her, on a week when she had so little left to take. She'd offended him. That was what she landed on. The breakfast had been too much. A proud man doesn't want to be fed like a stray. And she'd fed him like a stray, and he'd torn out 1 page to be decent about it, and then he'd gone somewhere she couldn't cost him anything. That was the story she told herself while she wrapped the cups in newspaper in the back, because she had started packing. Because 9 days is not enough time to pretend anymore. June watched her wrap the blue mug. "Not that one," June said. "Especially that one, Bug. That one has to be safe." June was quiet in the way she got quiet when her chest was tight. And Nora reached automatically for the inhaler on the shelf, and June waved it off. She didn't need it. She was just thinking. 6 years old and thinking with her whole face. "Is the sad coffee man mad at us?" Nora stopped with the newspaper in her hands. "No, baby, I don't think he's mad. Then why won't he come?" And Nora didn't have an answer to that one either. So she did what her mother used to do, which was pull June into her lap right there on the flattened boxes and hold her, and smell her hair, and rock a little, and say nothing. Because sometimes there isn't a reason a child should have to carry. And the kindest lie is a quiet one. The mug went into the box last. She wrapped it in 3 sheets. She wrote "fragile" on the side in marker. 30 years that mug had survived. Her mother's hands. Her hands. June's hands. Someday. Maybe. In some other kitchen that wasn't this one. She taped the box shut, and she didn't open it again. The envelope came on the 9th morning. She almost didn't see it. It was still dark. That blue dark before 5, and she came in the back way with June asleep against her shoulder, and she flicked the light, and there it was on the mat inside the front door. Plain, no stamp. No name. Someone had slid it under the glass in the night, under the notice that was still taped there. Pay or vacate. The number that had run her life for 30 days. She picked it up. It was thick. Folded pages inside, she could feel them. She almost opened it. Then, June coughed in her sleep, that dry catch that meant the inhaler, and the day started, and Nora set the envelope on the register beside the till and she forgot it. That's the truth of a drowning woman. She forgot it. She had eggs to crack, and a child to dose, and a calf to bury, and no room in her hands for one more piece of paper she assumed was a bill. It sat there by the till all morning, under her mother's note. Feed them first, count later. 2 pieces of paper, side by side, and she didn't read either one, because she already knew what her mother thought, and she was too tired to be told again. The column dropped at noon. She found out the way everyone found out, which was that the phone in her apron started buzzing and wouldn't stop. Then the shop phone rang. Then Mrs. Okafor was in the doorway, out of breath, no coat, the pharmacy left open behind her, holding her own phone out like it was hot. Nora, she could barely get it out. Nora, have you seen it? The ledger, have you seen it? Seen what? The gray palette. Mrs. Okafor's voice dropped on the name the way everyone's did. That old fear, the critic no kitchen, in the city survived. He printed. This week. And Nora, she pressed the phone into Nora's hands. It's you. It's about you. Nora looked down at the little screen. The headline was black and plain. The gray palette. And under it, smaller, the thing that had already stopped the whole city cold by noon, because this was the man who ended restaurants, the man whose column was a funeral. And he had never once in 15 years written the word he'd written here. A mercy on Ashmill. She read the first line standing up. Then she had to sit. She sat down on the stool behind her own register with June's inhaler in one pocket and a torn page reading thank you in the other. And she read the thing that a widowed man had written about her without ever telling her his name. I have spent 15 years teaching this city to be afraid of me, it began. I have closed kitchens with a paragraph. I have made chefs weep into sinks I will never see. I built a reputation on a single conviction, that a plate is a promise, and most cooks are liars. I stopped believing food could mean anything the year my wife died. Everything tasted like paper. I ate because the body insists. I reviewed because the fear was the only power I had left, and a frightened man loves his power. Then, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, I began walking each morning to a failing coffee shop in the Ashmill district. I chose it because it was quiet, and because the woman who ran it did not know me, and I was tired of being known. She never learned my name. I never gave it. I was rude to her. I want that on the record. I grunted. I corrected her chalkboard. I never left a tip in the jar her small daughter had labeled in crayon. I gave that woman nothing. For a year, 300 mornings and more. Nora's hands were shaking now. She kept reading. And every single day, she gave me a cup of coffee she could not afford to give, in a chipped blue mug that had belonged, I would later learn, to her dead mother. She never charged me. She never mentioned it. I found out only recently that she logged it in her books as spillage, so that her own ledger would not shame her for her kindness. She hid her generosity from her accountant the way other people hide their sins. On the morning I learned she was being evicted, that a company called Meridian had papered her door for $8,000 she did not have, that a blogger had already printed her obituary for clicks. On that morning, this woman, packing boxes in the back of her own dying store, made me a hot breakfast, hash and 2 eggs. I learned afterward it was the food she had set aside for her asthmatic child's lunch. It was the one real meal in the building, and she put it in front of me and said only, "You look like you needed it." I have gutted 100 kitchens for forgetting that a meal is a mercy. For a year I was fed mercy by a woman who never learned my name and never asked me for one thing. The line was already everywhere by the time she reached it. People were screenshotting it. It would be on the block by 1 o'clock, on the whole city's phones by dark. Junebug Coffee is not the finest caf in this city. It is the last honest one on a dying block, and if we let it close, we will deserve the silence that follows. And at the bottom, where 15 years of that column had carried no name, no face, nothing but the fear, the paper had finally run the line. The gray palette is Walter Gray, Restaurant critic for the Rose City Ledger since. There was a photograph. It was him. The gray face. The stiff shoulders she'd nicknamed a colonel for. The man at the corner table with the notebook he never tore a page from, except once, for her. She said his name out loud in the empty caf. Walter, she'd served him 300 times, and this was the first time she'd said his name. It felt strange in her mouth. It felt like meeting someone. Then, she remembered the envelope. She grabbed it off the register. She tore it open with her thumb, standing, careless now, and the pages inside were covered in that small hard print she'd have known anywhere. It was the column, an earlier one, crossed out and rewritten in the margins, whole paragraphs scratched and done again, a man arguing with himself over every word. His first draft. He'd written it at her corner table. On the mornings, she thought he was just a retired teacher who missed being right. He'd been trying to save her the whole time. He'd slid it under her door at dawn on his way to file the real one, so that if she ever wondered, she would know she'd been seen. At the top of the first page, before all the crossing out, he'd written a note to her. Just to her. 4 words. You were not invisible. Nora Kessler put the pages down on her mother's note, on feed them first, count later, and she covered her face with both hands, and in her empty failing caf 9 days from the end, she finally let herself do the things she wouldn't do in front of the bank, or Preston Cole, or her own child. She cried. And then, because she was her mother's daughter, she wiped her face, and she made a fresh pot, because whatever happened next, people were going to come, and you feed them first. They came at 5. She opened the way she always opened, in the blue dark, alone, the mug in her hand. She flicked on the light and turned to the door to flip the sign, and she stopped. There was a line. Not a few people. A line. It ran from her door down the sidewalk, past Meridian's Fresh for Lease sign, hammered into her own window frame, past the pharmacy all the way to the corner and around it. Strangers, dozens of them, in the cold, in coats, their faces lit blue from below because every single one of them was holding a phone open to the same column. They'd come before dawn to a caf they'd read about at midnight. They'd come to stand where the city had written her off, and they'd come to spend money in it. She opened the door. The cold came in, and so did the sound of them. A low murmur that went quiet when they saw her. This small woman in an apron with a chipped blue mug in her hand. The woman from the column. Somebody at the front started clapping. Then all of them. She served coffee until her arm ached. She ran out of cups and washed them and served more. 8 tables, 30 years, and every seat full for the first time in longer than she could stand to count. June came out from the back in her school clothes and stood staring at the crowd with her mouth open. And Nora put her to work carrying napkins because the child wanted to help, and because moving kept the tears off both their faces. Preston Cole arrived at 9 to serve the final papers. He had his folder. He had his careful shoes. He came around the corner already reaching into his coat, and then he saw the line, and he saw the 2 news vans double parked at the curb, and he saw the camera swing toward him because somebody in the crowd had recognized the man from Meridian, the man from the eviction glass, and had said his name loud. Nora watched it happen through the window. She watched him understand in real time that the paperwork wasn't going to work this morning. A reporter got to him first. "Are you the leasing agent evicting Junebug Coffee?" You could see him swallow it. You could see the whole machine of him change gears behind his eyes, right there on camera. The arrogance folding itself into something that wanted to survive the 6 o'clock news. Meridian, he said, has always valued its community tenants. He was sweating in the cold. In fact, in light of recent developments, we're prepared to offer Miss Kessler a full renewal. On favorable terms. We never wanted to see a neighborhood institution close. Inside, Nora laughed once, sharp, into her hand. The folder went back in his coat unopened. He never took it out again. Dana Fisk never showed her face at all. She did it quiet, the way cowards do. By 10 o'clock, somebody in the line refreshed the blog, and the dead by fall list was gone. Deleted, scrubbed, like it had never named her. But the internet keeps what you feed it, and by noon there was a screenshot going around. Dana's own list, Ashmill's storefronts that won't survive, laid right over a photo of Junebug's packed room and the line out the door. Somebody captioned it, "Aged like milk." That became the block's joke by lunch. Her next list, months later, nobody read. That's the thing about mistaking cruelty for taste. The taste was never yours to begin with. And Chip, loud Chip, who'd stood in her shop and called her a charity in front of 6 people, who'd said that man's bled you dry for a year. Chip stood in the line he'd mocked. All the way at the back. Waited his 40 minutes in the cold like everybody else. When he got to the counter, he wouldn't look at her at first. He put down his money. Full price. On the hard day cup, he started, mumbling, I know, Chip." She poured him a large. She didn't comp it, and she didn't gloat. Milk's on the end. He took it, and he found a corner, and he was quiet for once in his life. And that was enough. She didn't need him small. She just needed him to stand where he'd stood before and pay for what he'd sneered at, in front of the same room. The street had watched the wound. The street watched this too. The back rent came out of a single week's trade. She did the math late one night after close, June asleep in the back, and she added it 3 times because she couldn't believe it. $8,400. Covered, not by a lottery, not by a stranger's check, not by some windfall falling out of the sky. By people. By cups. $3 at a time, the same $3 100 people had decided her mother's calf was worth, because a gruff widower had told them the truth in a newspaper. The lease was saved by demand. She'd earned every dollar of it, standing at her own machine. Walter came at 6:40. Of course he did. He came the second morning, after the crowd had thinned enough that a man could get through the door, and he came at his time, 6:40, the way he'd come 300 mornings before. But the room went quiet when he stepped in, because they all knew him now. The gray palette. The face from the column. The most feared man in the city's kitchens, standing in a coffee shop in a rumpled coat, looking older and grayer and somehow lighter than he'd ever looked at that corner table. He didn't go to the counter. He went to the corner. His corner. He sat down where he always sat, facing the door, and he took the little leather notebook out of his coat and he set it on the table. And then, deliberately, he took the rubber band off, and he pushed the whole thing to the far edge of the table, away from himself, setting it down, putting it away. Nora came over with the mug, the chip blue one. She'd unwrapped it from the box the night the line came, taken the fragile marker off with her thumb, put it back in service where it belonged. She set his black coffee in front of him, and she stood there, and for the first time in a year she had nothing to hide from him, and nothing to log as spillage, and no reason left to pretend she didn't know who he was. He looked up at her. The gray face. That old grief still in it, but something else now moved in beside it. "I never learned your first name," she said. "In a whole year. I'm sorry about that." "Walter, Nora, I know." A ghost of something at the corner of his mouth. "It's on the crayon drawing." She signed it. Under the sad coffee man. He touched the pocket over his chest, where the drawing still was, where it had been the whole time. "I've carried it since." Nora's throat closed. She didn't trust herself to speak, so she waited. He turned the mug a quarter turn on the table. The way she'd seen him do it 100 times without ever knowing it meant anything. Then he said the thing he'd torn out one page to write and slid one envelope under a door to say, and now, finally, said out loud, with his own mouth, in front of a full room, "Thank you." The whole calf heard it. The man who ended kitchens, who'd made chefs weep, who had never in 15 years said a kind word he didn't get paid for, saying thank you to a barista over a free cup of coffee, plain as anything, like it was the easiest thing in the world. "That column," he said, "is my last. I filed it, and I retired the byline the same hour. I'm done frightening people for a living." He looked down at the black coffee, at the steam off it. "Food tasted like nothing to me for 3 years, Nora. Everything was paper. And then some stubborn woman kept handing me a cup I hadn't earned, in her dead mother's mug, and one morning it tasted like something again." He wrapped both hands around it. "Old hands. I don't know how to pay that back." "I don't think you can. I think you just pass it down the counter." "Feed them first," Nora said quietly. "Count later." He looked at her. "My mother's rule," she said. "It's taped inside the till. She started this whole place 30 years ago, giving away coffee to anyone sinking. I thought it was going to bury me." She almost laughed. "Turns out it was the only thing that saved me." Walter Gray nodded slowly, like a man filing something true. And then he picked up his mug and he drank, and June came out from the back with a fresh drawing already in her hand for him. And the caf was warm and loud and full, and outside on the glass, the for lease sign was already down, and Preston Cole never returned to Ashmill again. That was more than a year ago now. If you go into Junebug Coffee this winter, this is what you'll see. The light comes in low and gold in the afternoons, the way it does in Portland when the rain finally quits for an hour. Every table's full, more days than not. There's a 6-year-old, 7 now, restocking napkins behind the counter like she owns the place, which one day she will. And her chest is clear because the medicine's covered now, and she'll tell you her name is June and the caf's named after her if you give her half a second. Behind the register, up on the wall, there's a chip blue mug in a little wooden frame. People ask about it. Nora tells them it was her mother's, and that it's the only one that survived, and that it survived because it kept getting used, which is the only way anything survives. And on the shelf below it, she sells replicas now. Plain blue mugs with a chip painted into the glaze on purpose. There's a little card next to them in a child's handwriting. "The Hard Day Cup. Buy one, and the next person who's sinking drinks free." They sell faster than she can order them. Walter still comes. 640, the corner, facing the door. He's not a critic anymore, just a regular. Just a gruff old man who finally learned to say good morning. He orders his black coffee, and he pays for it now, every day, full price. And on his way out, he drops the change in the jar with the crayon label, the jar he ignored for a whole year. June labels a new one every few months when the old one wears out. He tips every one of them. People still ask Nora if she knew. All that year, 300 mornings, feeding the most powerful man in the city out of her own thinning pocket while she drowned. Did she know? Did she suspect? Was it some kind of long game, some bet that paid off? She always says the same thing. No, she never knew. She never asked. She'd have done it if he'd been nobody at all. She nearly went under doing it. That's the whole point, she says. You don't feed a man because of who he might turn out to be. You feed him because he's hungry, and you still can. Because here's the thing about a kindness you give into silence. Expecting nothing, sure it landed nowhere and mattered to no one. It's not lost. It never was. It just takes the long way home. If someone once did a small quiet thing for you and never knew it mattered, tell me about it, and tell me the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels.